Earlier in the week, we told you about a ruling by the Supreme Court that will allow mail-in ballots to be counted in Pennsylvania if received within 3 days of Election Day. It's likely not going to be the last legal challenge surrounding this election in that state. Joining us now is the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Also with us for this conversation is former senior advisor for the House Oversight Committee, Kurt Bardella. He is a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. So, Attorney General Josh Shapiro, what legal battles do you predict post-election? And at least the ruling that the Supreme Court handed down here gives some order to what appears to be a very high turnout.
Hey, look, Mika, it's good to be with you. You know, it's hard to predict what this president will do. He and his enablers and his legal team have been incredibly erratic. What we know is that they've attacked our voting laws here in Pennsylvania. They've actually made it harder for people to tried to make it harder for people to vote. They've tried to make it easier to intimidate voters, particularly in our black and brown communities. They've alleged fraud where there isn't any. They've spun these ridiculous conspiracy theories. And as a result, they've gone 0 for 3 in our courts here in Pennsylvania and all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. We beat them at every turn. And I can assure the people of Pennsylvania, as I have many times, and certainly the American people, that we're prepared for whatever comes next, whether it's actions on Election Day or actions to try and discard or dismiss ballots once the polls close. We'll be ready. You know, the president loves to tweet and talk and make up a lot of nonsense. But in a court of law, we deal with facts and evidence. And so far, the president has zero to back up his ridiculous claims. And that's why he keeps losing in court.
Mr. Attorney General, it's Willie Geist. Great to have you on this morning. As you say, President Trump is trying to muddy the waters, talking about ballots being found in creeks. All these stories have been debunked, stolen ballots and everything else. From where you sit as Attorney General, how much voter fraud do you see, and how much should you expect with mail-in ballots, for example?
Well, look, you know, Trump's own FBI has talked about how there's a minuscule amount of voter fraud. And by the way, Willie, I've prosecuted people for voter fraud, but not the kind of stuff that Donald Trump is alleging. And in fact, you know, the basis for one of his federal suits that he filed was that our vote by mail statute, you know, was rife with fraud. And I went to court and said, hey, Mr. President, put up or shut up, demonstrate the fraud. And the judge said, you know, Mr. President, you don't actually have to demonstrate actual fraud, just the possibility that fraud could exist. It's actually a relatively low evidentiary bar. The president couldn't even get over that. And the judge dismissed his case. Every step of the turn, he spun these ridiculous tales that he's never been able to back up in court. But, Willie, here's the deal. He's doing it for a specific reason. You use the word muddy the water. I think he's just trying to create chaos, because what he's trying to do, Willie, is to make the voters here feel powerless, to make them feel like maybe they won't control the outcome of this election. But here's the deal. In our democracy, and certainly here in Pennsylvania, the people are the ones with the power, not Donald Trump. And the people will be the ones to determine the outcome of this election. Based upon what I see, I don't think they're going to choose Donald Trump, which is why he is working overtime to do everything in his power to make sure that not all legal eligible votes are counted, and why we're working extra overtime to make sure he's defeated in court. And we'll continue to do that so long as he brings these ridiculous lawsuits.
And part of that chaos, as you know, that he's trying to create is that what you see in the early returns on election night may not be believable from where he's sitting. In other words, you'll see a number perhaps that shows Joe Biden with an advantage in the state of Pennsylvania, but don't believe that. And if the count goes on into subsequent days, that gives him more air and more space to make that claim that something fishy is going on. So we've been trying to help our viewers know what to expect on election night. So what should, in the state of Pennsylvania, a viewer of this show, if they tune on to MSNBC or Peacock TV or wherever they're watching, what should they expect to see in Pennsylvania on election night?
Well, so we're going to count ballots as follows. We're going to count the precincts, and the precinct totals, that is the people that vote on Election Day, seem to be running at about 55% of the overall electorate. And then about 45% of the overall electorate is going to vote by mail. And those ballots are going to take a little bit longer to be counted. But understand that voters who are voting by mail are overwhelmingly Democrats. Seemingly, it's running about 70% of those vote by mail ballots are Democrat. You're going to be able to go on our Department of State website. You're going to be able to click on a particular county, and you're going to be able to see not just the precinct totals, but the amount of outstanding mail-in ballots. And you're going to know the party breakdown of those ballots as well. And so you're going to have a pretty good sense of the direction things are going. And we just want to caution people to recognize that the precinct totals are just roughly half the picture. And Donald Trump, we know, is going to be doing everything in his power to sort of muddy the communications and probably even do something legally to stop the count. What I need you all to know is we're prepared for that. And we'll be ready to make sure that every single legal eligible vote is counted. And, you know, the president keeps sort of putting out a lot of noise leading up to Election Day, and I expect there'll be a lot of noise coming after Election Day. But what I'm seeing increasingly is that this president is sort of shrinking in a lot of ways, because the noise that you're hearing more and more in Pennsylvania is the noise of the voters requesting their mail-in ballots, sending them back, making a plan to vote, firing up the rest of the people in their community. And a lot of people are drowning out the president, and the voters are the ones who are getting the say. And after all, that's the way it works in our democracy.
All right, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, thank you very much. Kurt Bardell.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.